Hello, and welcome to another FHIR for Developers tutorial video. Today we're continuing on our FHIR subscriptions for Connectathon 28 quest, and we'll be building out a C# FHIR subscriptions listening endpoint for REST type notifications. So this would be the kind of server that's listening for incoming events from a different FHIR server, and kind of walking through a basic version of that as we would build it in C#. So with that said, there's a lot to do. Let's jump right in. I'm starting here just in a folder. Would be a Git repo, but I haven't initialized it yet, and I can do that after the video. There's plenty of videos of going through all those steps already here. So we don't need to spend time on it. First, I'm just checking. I am running .NET 5.0. I have some pre-release versions, and we don't want to confuse the issue with that today. I'm going to go ahead and look first at the .NET New, the list of templates here. Normally, if you've watched my videos, you know I'm a big fan of just doing a console application and adding everything we want to that. However, we're literally building a REST endpoint, so I feel like we should use some of the templates that are for REST endpoints. They will give us kind of a lot more functionality, the base functionality we want, without adding too much stuff we don't want to. The two that I'm looking at that are the main contenders are this first one, the empty web, and the web API. Empty web would obviously give us even less of stuff that we would need to remove, but I kind of like the idea of doing web API since that's probably much more common for in use. So we'll go ahead and create a web API. We'll put it in a, we'll go ahead and make a source directory since we did not have one of those. And then we'll do a new web API and we'll put it in source. And we'll go ahead and give it a name of subscription CS, endpoint. And we'll do interactive in case it has any questions for us. I don't know that it does. No, it doesn't. Perfect. So normally from here I would launch code directly, but fun fact, VS Code has some oddities if you're trying to launch from a different folder for the web APIs. So I discovered that when I was doing my prep a little bit earlier. So in this case, we want to go into the source folder first and then launch our code. We can use our project that we've created already, and we have everything here. Let's see, there we go. Required assets are missing. Do we want to add them? Of course we do. So from this point, we should be able to build and see if everything builds. And we could run it directly, but we have a couple of things that I know I want to change before I do that. So I'm going to go ahead and change them first. The main being, let's see, properties, launch settings. So this is a little confusing inside the web APIs. There's this launch settings.json, and this is where we control a lot of the random ports and different things like that. I do not actually want SSL turned on, just for sanity. If you do have, we'll just delete it for now. I thought this supported, interesting. I thought this had JSON with comments, but it does not. So the trick here is that if we have SSL turned on, we have fake certificates and need to trust, and it just adds a lot of extra things that we don't actually want. So I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. We're also going to get rid of launch browser. And that's just because we're going to keep reissuing the same things over and over again. And we're going to get rid of Swagger, so we're going to do it. Now, by default, the web API does include Swagger and all this stuff, which is really neat. But in our case, we're just having listening endpoints that's listening at one URL and doesn't really have any description of note. So we'll go ahead and clean some of those things up before we even get started. With that said, we can see in our launch that we have some things here. And let's see, I think that this will just work directly. I don't know if we probably need to comment this out to not launch the web browser because we don't actually want the web browser. Let's see what happens. If we start running now, we can see all kinds of output, and we can see that it's on port 5000, and that way we can control our own web browser to go to port 5000. Cannot be found, and there we go. So in this case, it's saying that it failed to redirect because we half removed our HTTPS. Maybe an empty web project would have been better. A little late now. So I forgot to turn these off. Like we said, we don't actually want Swagger. You can turn it on again if you have a web API with a lot of controllers and things. It's actually pretty nifty to have on there that it automatically generates on startup. But in our case, it's kind of stalls on startup for a second, and it's not going to be anything useful for us. The thing it was complaining about here was this HTTPS redirection. By default, it says if you connect to HTTP, promote to HTTPS, and we don't actually want that. So if we turn all of that off and then start again, clean up our windows a little bit while we wait, we can see we're going to localhost 5000, and there is no web page found, which makes sense because we don't really have anything there. I believe there is a way, I think the weather forecast thing that it has by default, it's in the controllers one. If we do something like /weather forecast, yes. So we can see if we go to /weather forecast and do a get, it gives us that information that we had. So we do know it's working right now. We'll stop our debugger and start deleting the things that we don't want. We'll leave it for a second because we'll use it as a template to build up some other things. So what do we actually want in this case? We're going to need a controller that we can use to get notifications. So in our case, since we are software developers and great at naming things, we will name it notificationcontroller.cs. Very aptly named. And we'll go ahead and start by grabbing, we'll grab some of these. We'll grab that much of it and see what happens. And we don't want this to be a weather forecast controller. We want this to be a notification controller, and give it a class here. So by default, this route, this syntax here, will map it to the controller name. So in this case, it's going to be notification because it knows we don't actually want notification controller in the name. We could manually reroute this here, doing things like notification, or even adding additional ones. We can just go and add multiple of them. But for now, that should work well enough. So I think at this point, we're pretty safe. We might want some of this syntax. We're pretty safe deleting it. So we'll move that to the recycle bin, and we won't leave our dangling weather forecast class there either. Now just to check, I think there was a service or something, wasn't there? No, that's a different type of project, so we don't have to worry about it. Perfect. So now we have a web API that does absolutely nothing. And again, we probably could have used a different template to get to this state, but this is the route that is probably familiar. So what do we actually want to do? We'll start by saying we just want to listen to let's see, normally a notification comes in, we're doing a post. So why don't we do that? So we'll make a function that we can use to, uh, oops, we want a task, action result, and we want to handle post. Now, normally there's a much nicer syntax for doing a post here. You can just do a function just like in the other one that we had for handling a get, that we can do something like public void, uh, you know, nice post, and then we can give it some sort of parameter here to say what we're expecting. Now, we could go ahead and do something like that with the nice fire classes. We probably could, but in this case, what we're going to say is just give me the post directly, and I'm going to read it. We'll maybe mock up both, and we can actually put in different routes for them or something like that to see which direction we want to go with it. But for now, let's do it this way. Oops. So what does that leave us? Well, we still want to do an HTTP post because that is the function we want. And in this case, we want to say that we're going to consume application FHIR plus JSON. So that's the main MIME type we want. But we also probably want to handle the case where we get application JSON. So this kind of decoration here is telling it that this function is going to take in either of these MIME types. And all the MVC routing and all that kind of stuff will handle that for us. So that's pretty handy. What do we have when we're in here? So we're inside a controller, so we actually have some static variables that we can, some higher level variables from this controller base that we can access. And that's what we're going to do. First, we'll do some sanity checks, and that's to say if we have no request or if we have a request without a body. There's really nothing we can do. So we can go ahead and write line and just say something like, oops, handle post, cannot process a post without data. And then we want to return status code, and I always forget what's the HTTP status codes. We can just look this up quickly here, and we can see the one I'm looking for is bad request 400. Okay, I always think there's a different one for some reason, but we'll check to see if there's anything better. Yeah, that sounds fair. We can just do bad request. Yeah, we'll just do bad request. So we'll return a status code 400. And that way we can do that. We can actually give it some content here as well. So we can say something like post requires data. Sure, let's do that. So at this point, we have access to the request. We know that there's a request body, and in this case, we know that they're not null. And again, this is one of the trickier things here in the way that everything's set up. The nice way works great if you're sure of what kind of content you're getting. In this case, we're going to say we just want a string, and we'll figure out what it is after. And that is, again, since we do have access to FHIR data types, we could try and put that in directly. One of the problems is we have very little control over how it's deserialized in that case. So when the data comes in, it's going to just automatically try and process it to convert it into the data type we want. And it doesn't necessarily understand FHIR JSON and things like that. So this is much easier to try and deal with it. Since this isn't production code, we can go ahead and wrap all this in a nice try-catch block that says something like handle post, caught, and we can just do ex.message. And I've gotten in the habit of checking for an inner exception. And if it does have an inner exception, we'll just put that as well. So that way, if it's some generic, operation failed, but it does say see inner exception, we don't have to do quite as much work here. However, when that happens, we can just go ahead and say, oops, return status code, and since there was an exception here, we'll put an exception, and same thing, we'll just put a value, and we'll put ex.message as our value. Assuming that we haven't caught an exception and thrown out of here, we generally just want to say no content, because we're not too interested in that right now. We'll say to start. So we can just return a status code of 204, I believe. Since we have this up, we can double check. But if I remember, 204, yep, 204 is no content. Perfect. So in our generic case, we just want to say, yes, we accepted your post, and we'll figure out what to do with it later. We can add more complex cases or handling in if we want, but again, this is a good just example. Okay, so we have the basic thing here. And now what we need to do is try and read the post body to process. So what we really want is a stream reader. And I'm guessing that this can give us system.io so that we have it. And we're going to need a new stream reader with request.body. What's body reader have these days? Oh, that's a pipeline. Yeah, that's a pipe reader. We just want a stream reader around it for simplicity, because what we're just going to do is do something like content equals reader dot read to end async, and we can just await that. So all we're going to do here is say give us a stream and just read the whole thing as a string, and we don't care. Now, obviously in production, you want to be careful with this about the size of things that are being loaded into memory and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But for example code, this will get us pretty far along the way. So what do we want to do with it? Long term, we want to parse it and all these other things. But for now, we'll just write it out on the screen. So what we can just do is do something like, we'll actually do this here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, post, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Then we do a /n. Oops, this editor does not figure that out. Visual Studio Full, when you hit enter, it does that for you, but we don't care. Then we'll just put the content as is because we don't care. We want to make sure we put a /n so that we get to the next line. And then we put a, oops, we can actually do post. We can do something like this, and then we can do that. So it's very clear when we have a post above or a post below. That looks reasonable as a way to get started. So this will just take whatever we post and put it on the screen, and that's it. Nothing too fancy. So let's see if it builds and runs. Hopefully it does. And it built, and it is running, and it is running on localhost 5000. What I'm going to do here is just bring in a window. I posted a video about this already, but this is just some a manual test scripts using an extension in VS Code that lets us just do HTTP calls. And in this case, what we can do is take advantage of that to post, for instance, a handshake. Of course, we posted it to a URL that does not exist. So what we want to do is post it to our local URL. And that is this URL. There we go. And we can say send request. 404 not found is localhost 5000. That's notification URL. And it's saying to do localhost. That's interesting. Let's see if we're missing something here. Send request. Nope, it is definitely HTTP 5000 localhost. Control C is running. It says it's running. And let's look in our routes and make sure. Again, the joy of... So, in order to test this a little easier, we'll actually add one more thing here. Oh, we probably... Are we missing something we need here? I'm wondering if we need anything for injection. We'll assume we don't. And I don't think we need to. Oops, wrong level. So, in order to test this a little easier, what we'll add is a nicely either. We'll call it default get. And we'll do the same thing. We're just going to say an HTTP get, and this produces, and we'll produce text plain because we don't need too much more than that. And we just want to return a string with something like OK and we'll just to string, and isn't there something that you tell it like, yeah, whatever. We won't let it yell at us for the invariant culture thing. So, no, I know why. This is an issue in debugging. Yes, okay. So, I forgot I didn't map to the default, I mapped to notification. So there's our get that was doing, and then our post will work too. But we need to actually put in the right URL. Notification. So when we post that, we can see we got back our 204 no content, and we can see our post here in our debug console. As expected. We just have to give it the right URL. It's the little things. So I believe we can, just to check to see if we are correct here, if we give it that route and then run, we'll double check to see if it takes it first. And there are multiple ways to do this, but we can probably check on our web browser even easier. If we just get rid of notification now, yes, now that's returning correctly what we would expect. So we have the option of doing it either way. So that's the multiple routes there. Perfect. So already we have a lot of what we need. And that's to say, we have our web server, it's listening, and we can receive what we want. Now, there's two other things we'll see if we can get to in this session without getting too long that we would want to do. One is actually parsing this and making some use out of it. And then the other is setting up a package so that we can get public addresses easier. Both obviously have plenty of value, but we need to pick one to do first. And so I think we'll go ahead and set up the parsing first, because that sounds more FHIR-ish. That's more along the lines of what we're trying to accomplish here. So the next thing I'm going to do is, normally I would add the FHIRly net SDK. Unfortunately, what we're testing is this R4 backport, and that needs a build of R4 from FHIR, which has not been built yet. So what I do have is a set of model files that we can use in the interim to be able to parse and do everything else. So I'm just going to paste that into my folder There we go. It's copying it over because it's large. And this is, I have a project that's on GitHub that you can use to build these models and value sets and all these different things for this type of testing before the official libraries are posted. So it gives us a little more flexibility here. So this part isn't going to be, hopefully long term, you would just do the same thing but use the normal FHIR libraries. So we probably want to add another function here, and I don't know, we can leave it in the controller for now, just for simplicity. And we can say, we'll put it somewhere else. We'll add a new file, and we will call it notification notification.cs. Sure, let's call it that. We're going to need a couple things. We'll start with that, just for simplicity, and we'll get rid of a bunch of things that we don't need. So we have our notification, and we're probably not going to need any of these. So this is what we want to do something with the notification here. So let's start by saying, do we want a static class or a class we instantiate? We'll go ahead and say a static class for now. And we'll just do a void handle notification string context. Oops, we can close this so that we have a little more space to work. And we'll actually make this a boolean. And this is a function to handle a subscription notification. True if handled correctly, false otherwise. So we can give it a little thing here. And here we can say something like return false by default, because actually we'll say return true. If we didn't run into any errors, assume we were successful. We don't want to assume. If we still here, we are successful. Now, again, normally we would be able to use the standard FHIR libraries, but in the short term, we're going to be using these other FHIR models, and these are just essentially models that have serialization annotations and custom serializer things so that they actually work with system text JSON and parse and serialize everything properly, handle extensions and all that kind of stuff. Not what I would want to use in production, but again, by the time this is really needed, those will all be available. So we will go ahead and add system text JSON, and let's check here. If content is null or empty, we can just go ahead and return false. And then we want to do a try catch here so that we can say we're going to try to parse this thing, and if it doesn't, then we can do something else. I don't know why this is. Okay, that was just behind. So here we'll do the same thing. We'll just say handle notification, and we'll say caught. And if ex.interexception is not null, then we want to go ahead and add the inner message. So pretty straightforward stuff here. So what are we going to do? At the end of the day, we think this is supposed to be a bundle because everything that comes in is supposed to be a bundle. So we can do a FHIR csr4.models.bundle equals, and I'm trying to remember what this is. JSON serializer dot deserialize as a FHIR CS models. Oops. And actually, we can just give it. Yeah, we can give it a bundle. We can give it the content, and I think that we made options, and I don't think we need them here, but we'll go ahead and assume that. I don't think we need it. We'll see. We'll see what happens as we try it. So in this case, yeah, I think that's valid, isn't it? Let's see. Yeah, we can just do a strip. Perfect. And that should catch up here. Yeah, perfect. So, and this is really why we wanted this catch, because if we post garbage, it's not going to deserialize. We could go and check to see if this looks like FHIR content, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, or try a deserializer that does a Boolean or things like that. But this is straightforward enough for what we're doing. So at this point, we have, hopefully, a notification done. And what we can actually do is look to see, again, thinking about what a subscription notification looks like, we know that there should be at least one entry that has a subscription status. So we can check for entries and see if this is null or has no content. So if not any, we know that there is a problem. So we can go ahead and write, something like, and we can put our nice name here if we like. I don't usually end up doing this for too many messages because it starts getting long. But we can say bundle, because we know it's a bundle at this point, so we can use notification. You know what? Let's just call this bundle, because that will make our lives easier. And we'll assume it has an ID, and if not, it'll just print a null there. Has no entries. And here we'll return false, because it can't be a valid notification if the bundle has no entries. From here, we can actually check to see if, let's see, what are we trying to get to? We can do bundle.entry, and this is a list. Okay, so we know that there's at least one, so we can access 0, and we can actually look at the resource. And actually we can, we'll put it in a separate one. And then we can do the same thing. We can put a message here saying channel notification, bundle ID, entry 0 is missing the resource. And we can return false here. And now we can come and do something like, let's see, the resource there. I don't remember off the top of my head these models. I've been using the Firely things because that's what I prefer to use. So, but this will get us moving. The resource is just a resource. So, we can check resource dot, there you go, resource type. So, if bundle resource type does not equal, and this is supposed to be a subscription status. Well, there's a way for us to get that literal, but I don't remember where it is off the top of my head. Maybe it's in value sets. Yeah, it's somewhere in here. But for now, we'll just hard code it and say subscription status. Then we can do the same thing. We want just another message. That's why I usually don't put all these. And we can come here and say, okay, handle notification, invalid entry 0 resource type, and then we can put bundle entry 0 resource type. And say that return false. And we just keep going down the line here. So at this point, we know this is a subscription status. So we could even grab a versioned subscription status equals, and we can just do subscription status of bundle entry 0 resource. And from here, we could just, because we don't want to go too far down, we can say condition type and status dot, what is it, type? I think that's the right field. We'll see. And we can just put ID and put, yeah, we don't need that. We'll just put the type for now. Oh, we can look in the, over here. I forgot to make our lives easy. Again, even when you work on these things all the time, it is easy to forget. And the type, there we go. That is the field we were looking for. So in theory, this will then tell us that we received a notification of that type, and we can put a date time or something if we want, but let's not worry about it too much. So now what we can do is say if notification, handle notification content is true, we don't have to do anything. And if it's false, we want to print it out. We'll do something like that. So if it's false, if it's not handled as a notification, we will print it out. But if it is a notification that we know how to do something with, we will have processed it in there. Let's make sure that we can build before we go too far. And it looks like we did, so we will start our project. Let's see what happens. So while this is coming up, excuse me. So we can see we have our localhost 5000, or yep, port 5000. We're going to do the same thing. I'm just going to post. Perfect. So I was just, again, using that other script to post here. And we can see we got a handshake. If I post this, we should see an event notification, and we can see that we can go back and forth and send all of these, and it goes back and forth. So, perfect. At this point, we can see that we are able to bring up the listener, receive the post, read the contents, parse the contents, and do that. So this is pretty far along. We still have a few minutes left. We can go ahead and do the one last thing that we really want to do, which is add some... Actually, we'll do that in the next... Yeah, we'll add tunneling in the next session, because that one I think people will want to watch separately anyway. So And this has actually gotten longer than I realized. So, perfect. With that said, we've brought up a simple web API that we can use to receive notifications. In this case, we're parsing them using these custom models, which again, you can just grab from this repo if you need in the short term. But obviously, we can see how that parsing would work using the standard FHIR libraries once the R4B builds are available that have these resources. So by the time this is more widespread, it'll be there, but this shows all the steps we'll need to do and what we'll want to start doing to handle those. So uh, if this helps, please let me know. If you have any questions or comments, let me know. And in the next video, we'll go ahead and add tunneling to show a public IP from behind internal networks so that you can test these things more publicly, more easily, and go from there. Thanks. Cheers.